Future Vision and Growth Network. I wanted to begin this conversation with a little bit longer video, and that is I'm really looking at starting an open discussion or dialogue or series or whatever you want to look at it, kind of a conversation around who we bring in and what kind of experiences we bring into our lives. And I think that's very important. I really do. Let me give you a little bit of background and context before I get started. And that is, I was very blessed. I said my parents grew up in a very rural part of Minnesota. When I grew up, the diversity up there was not very high. As a matter of fact, there was very little diversity in the city that I grew up in from the traditional definition of diversity. There was some unique diversity when it came to age. There was unique diversity of whether it was adoptive families. There's some religious diversity and some things like that. But as far as ethnic diversity or cultural diversity or things like that, it was not there. My parents moved us from Minnesota to Oklahoma. It was very, very different. I grew up in a very ethnically diverse neighborhood. Most of my growing up years, I would say from the time that I was about 5 years old to the time I was 20, I grew up in a pretty diverse area, and then went to college and spent quite a bit of time learning different cultures from my friends. I had friends that were from UAE. I had friends that were African American. I had friends that were Native. I had friends that were from all over the world. And then I moved to Oklahoma City, spent quite a bit of time learning the cultures of Oklahoma City and everyone in that experience, and then moved to Norman for the last 20 years. So I've been exposed to cultures from around the globe as well here. I've been exposed to other subcultures that are incredible. And one of the things that I love about that is my favorite thing in the whole world to do is sit down and listen. Which sounds crazy as I'm sitting here talking to a camera, but the reality is I love listening. I love learning about people. I love learning about their background, their history, where they're from, how they got here, how their families got here. It helped open my eyes to a lot of different things. I'll give you an example. I had no understanding of what it took to cross into the United States from Mexico. Had no understanding. That was not an experience I had had. That was not a conversation I had. But I was in the United Model UN in high school or in college, and I was able to have a partner who was from Mexico, and she described her family's crossing. And she did that in a very real way. She talked about it. She talked about the history, the legacy, what her dad went through to get here, all the different ways that he came over, and it changed my perspective. It changed what I thought, because I had a perspective and thought, oh, you just come in and it was no big deal. It was life and death at that point for this man, and he brought him and his family here. And so when I started to have those conversations around migration, immigration, and bringing things in, it opened my eyes and made me think, what would you do? What would you do if it was a life and death situation for you? Would you risk it? Would you do it? And so that opened up a great conversation. It made me think, it made me reflect, and it opened my eyes to some opportunities and thoughts. I had another of my students that was Native. And so it's been incredible. In Oklahoma, we have 39 federally recognized nations, which are our indigenous populations here. So each time I have an opportunity to sit down and talk with the tribal citizens of the different nations, I love to sit down and hear their culture, their history, their background. And you know, I look at it in honor and respect and learning, and not in a way of denigrating or misunderstanding that community. I want to hear, I want to learn, and I don't want to talk through it. I want to listen, because that lets me learn history, background, legacy, and some of the trauma that has been there as well. One of the things I learned about indigenous populations that was shocking for me is the idea that their children were taken and put into schools. And if you didn't know, there were Indian schools in Oklahoma, and they were brought into those schools, and they were essentially indoctrinated, or they were forced to become Christian, which is really interesting. That opened up a conversation about what it was to be Native in Oklahoma and what the labeling and expectation was, and also the fact that they were here when Europeans arrived, and the systems that were in place when Europeans arrived, and the fact that it was not raw land when we arrived. So there was more conversations around the settlement in the United States and what that looked like. Fantastic. I've worked with a lot of students who've been LGBTQ. I've worked with students I've worked with elderly students that are in their 60s. I've worked with students that have all different abilities. So that has been an amazing opportunity for me to sit down and listen and understand, where do you come from? I've worked with military students. I've worked with undocumented students. I've worked with international students from Saudi Arabia, which is fascinating, that are Muslim, that were brought here by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, paid for their education to bring them here, had them come and learn, and they were incredible students, fun to sit down and talk to, and we got to share our different traditions back and forth and what that looked like. It was just a great opportunity to learn. So here's my big conversation that I want. I want to know who is at your table. Who are the conversations you're having at your table with? Are you looking at somebody different than yourself? Are you listening to somebody different than yourself and really opening up the idea that you can learn from somebody completely different than you? If you're not, I'm going to challenge you to do that. Again, these are very different things. It could be different politically. It could be different regionally. It could be that it's rural versus urban. It could be elderly versus young. It could be generational differences. There are all different ways that you can look at diversity. It does not have to be only cultural, ethnic, sexual orientation, religion, or gender. Those are included, but there's other ways that you can look at diversity. I want you to open yourself up a little bit. I want to begin this conversation. I look at it like a pebble or a ripple effect. And that is, the more that we open up ourselves to new experiences and new ideas, the better that we will be. There's creativity. Have you talked to an artist? I am a very rational, logical thinker. I'm a critical thinker. I love it. I love going in my head and thinking. I am not a creator in that way. In that way, I have a son who's an artist. I had a mother who is an artist and a brother who's an artist. The way an artist thinks is very different than the way that I think. And I love that they do that. Their vision, the way that they portray what they see is very different than what I do. Likewise, I have people that are photographers. A true photographer can make you feel something by a photograph. Just because I take a picture with a camera does not make me a photographer. I know that's shocking, but I can take a picture with a camera, but that doesn't make me a person who can change the way that you feel through a lens. A filmmaker can do the same thing. So I am working on challenging everyone to meet someone new, sit across from them, and just simply ask one question. Tell me about your life. What is it like to be you? How did you get here? And then sit back and listen. I think this has an opportunity to change everything.